Now we turn to the Denver Broncos. And Nick Kosmider, we thank you. So please tell me, Nick, we have not met. Please tell me if I pronounce your name correctly.
You nailed it.
All right, good. I feel good about it. I've done something right today. I can tell my wife I've done one thing right today.
There you go.
Now look, thanks for joining us. You cover the Broncos each and every day. And whenever we have someone on to talk about a particular team or franchise, we like asking the questions, where has the franchise been? Where is it now? Where is it going? So, I thought the Colts were a mess last year. They are in no form or fashion what the Denver Broncos were last year. That is such a phenomenal franchise, a great fan base, great stadium, great place to go to a game. Could things have been more chaotic than they were last year for the Denver Broncos?
You would have to be a very creative person to convince me that there was some way that it could have been worse than it was in 2022. To kind of go back to your original part, where the Broncos are right now is mired in a 7-year malaise. They have not made the playoffs since winning Super Bowl 50 after the 2015 season. They've had 6 straight losing records. It is quite simply the worst stretch since the Broncos became an NFL franchise. And last year was sort of the culmination of it all, right? These high expectations after the acquisition of Russel Wilson turned into a nightmare. And it's funny enough, you mentioned the Colts. My colleague Zach Kiefer and I always talk about that Thursday night game between those two teams being sort of like the microcosm for both teams last year. That's where the Broncos are right now, and that's the work ahead of Sean Payton.
You were around Wilson last year for the first time, I'm assuming around him for the first time on a regular basis last year. For those of us here in, Southwest Ohio, Russell Wilson was born here, but that's about the only connection this town seems to have with Russell Wilson. What was your impression of him last year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, Russell Wilson came into Denver feeling he had a lot to prove, right? I mean, there was so much talk when he left Seattle about what he actually wanted for the second chapter of his career. And he kind of noted some of those things in terms of, obviously the winning was a big part of it, but it was clear that he wanted to be a bigger part of the equation in doing so. And the Broncos, I think to a fault, embraced that in a way in which it was the Russell Wilson show last year. From the moment he got here in March, everything was catered toward him in a way that I think put undue burden, undue pressure on what he needed to provide instead of, really kind of building the whole thing in sort of a holistic way. It was just from the very start, kind of an odd pairing between he and Nathaniel Hackett. And it was just a situation where, as the season went on, you could quickly see that there just was not a clear direction for how he was going to be used in Denver. And so I think when the season ended and the coaching search began, for this new ownership group, it was very clearly like, we need to hire a personality, a head coach who is going to run the whole thing, that there's not going to be a question as to who is in charge, of the franchise, of the football side. And that's what they believe they have in Sean Payton, but it's still going to be very important, with Russell Wilson and with the money he's owed and everything like that. It's very important that they make it work with him, and it's on him as much as it is on Sean Payton to make that happen.
There seemed to be just so much noise, and of course you don't read much about it until later oftentimes, not necessarily in this case, but I mean the whole thing with, Russell Wilson having a guy that's kind of his coach. It has an office inside of the facility and all this kind of thing going on. Do you think that Wilson has something left in the tank, or do you think this was just the start of, the start of something where, Father Time is catching up?
Yeah, obviously when you're looking at, a person's career, recent data points are important, right? Because that's the thing that you have most recently available to you. But I think even going back to 2021 for parts of that season when he had 25 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions, had the 5th best passer rating in the NFL, despite, having the injuries. I think it's one of those situations where he still does have it. And even last year, there were stretches where you saw, him still having the arm talent. Toward the end of the year, finally realizing that he needed to use his legs as a more, dynamic part of his skill set. I don't think that he's kind of over the cliff athletically or talent wise at this point. But there's a lot of things that he has to clean up that just got really out of whack last year. His footwork, his navigation of the pocket at times just seemed to be lost. And so there is some rebuilding with him that has to be done this year in order for him to improve. But I really do think that kind of getting back to his foundation, kind of getting rid of this idea that, Russ is going to cook and he's going to be the guy that is the focal point of this offense. I think that's where a change will certainly help him.
Okay. Peyton walks in the door, had tremendous success, including a Super Bowl win in New Orleans. He's been out a little while, and now he's back. What kind of impact, if any, have you seen just since he walked in the door the first time?
Yeah, it's been pretty pronounced. I'll just give you sort of one example is that the Broncos began their off-season program, their voluntary off-season program on Tuesday. Typically what that comes with here in Denver is, it was always Peyton Manning talking that first day of voluntary workouts when he was here, star players coming to the podium, the coach speaking. And then throughout that, phase one, phase two, there was more media availability. Sean Payton has kind of like cut all of that off, right? If it's not required by the NFL and the NFLPA in terms of their collective bargaining with media, he's not having players do it. That included free agents who signed last month. No big glitzy press conferences for them. He is very much, he's called it, we want to be anonymous donors is the term that he's used, like working behind the scenes, but very much not having this sort of hype train behind any of it. It has been sort of his philosophy, which is differed. Now, whether that translates to anything in the fall, we'll see. But that is the way in which he has just said that what has been working for the last 7 years has to change, and that's just one part of it.
For the upcoming draft, what needs to be addressed for the Broncos?
Well, the challenge is that they only have 5 picks to do it, and none of them in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah.
That's what you have when you trade a combined 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks for a coach and quarterback combo. That better work because, again, they have set themselves back from a draft perspective. Didn't have a first or second-round pick last year. Won't have a first or second-round pick this year. Won't have a second-rounder next year. So they really need to make hay. I think for them, a big focus is the front 7. They traded Bradley Chubb away to Miami midway through last year. That pick ultimately is the one that they used to then get Sean Payton away from New Orleans, get his rights from the Saints. And so they still haven't really replaced him. Randy Gregory, their big splash free agent signing from the Cowboys last March, had a really rough first year in Denver, only played 6 games, continuous injuries. He's had injury problems throughout his career. So I think that outside linebacker position in a division where you're trying to get after Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, that's where I'd really like to see Denver add quite a bit. And then, perhaps another running back. Javonte Williams, talented guy out of North Carolina who they drafted in the second round 2 years ago, had a major knee injury last October that will have him probably not ready for the start of the year. So I'd like to see them kind of have another guy in Sean Payton's offense that they can use at that position as well.
You know better than anybody, and in all the years I was broadcasting in the NFL, just the very name and the very presence, whether it was working for the franchise, running the franchise, very early on after he retired, just coming to games. John Elway. Now all of a sudden, John Elway is out, no longer with the franchise. Is that good? Is that bad? Does it not really matter?
Well, so John Elway, yeah, he last year served as kind of a consultant, working with this sort of new ownership group that was taken over, and kind of trying to help show them just some things institutionally with the franchise and things like that. Wasn't a major role, and then the year before that, in 2021, that is when he had stepped down from his GM role, kind of took an overseer role above George Payton, but even then, I think was somewhat limited. So this has kind of been going this direction for John Elway for a couple years. I think ultimately he's, to your point, kind of always going to be around. This next month is the 30th anniversary of the trade with the Colts that brought him to Denver in 1983. He is the most revered athlete in Denver of all time. Nikola Jokic could win a couple more MVPs and an NBA championship for the Nuggets, and I think he'd still have a hard time unseating John Elway as that guy in this region. But I think ultimately, look, this is a new ownership that is kind of given everything right now to Sean Payton. That he is the voice, he is the guy leading the charge in most ways on the football side. So I think kind of clearing that out and not having any sort of doubt as to who is running everything right now is one direction that they wanted to go. But I think John Elway will continue to be, a part of this franchise, even if not in an official capacity. A guy that's just sort of, kind of always around, has a presence in a lot of ways, similar to how Peyton Manning still does with the Broncos. He still lives here, doesn't have a formal role with the organization, but is very much kind of a part of it still.
Well, we love dogs on the program, and yours sounds like he or she needs to get out and do some business.
Sorry.
We love dogs. We have all kinds of dogs on the program. I got a whole bunch of them at home. Nick, we thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
All righty. Very, very kind for him to join us here today.